Now, the second Green Hydrogen Summit took place this week, and we saw Sasol, Amplats and BMW partnering to bring South Africa's first hydrogen vehicle. The energy alternative is an important decarbonization tool as we keep the Paris Agreement targets in mind. Africa is expected to become a leader in the production of green hydrogen. Prestele, consultant at Frost & Sullivan, joins us to explore Africa's green hydrogen opportunities in greater detail. Thank you so much for your time, Patrick. Now, when we talk about green hydrogen, are we talking about a tool to be used in the transition to a green economy, or something that would be an essential part of the green economy?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Essentially, green hydrogen is a gas that is produced through a process called electrolysis, which obviously splits water into hydrogen components and oxygen components using only renewable electricity. So that's really is the key word right here, that we use only renewable capacity. So that's your solar, that's your wind technology, for example. And that really makes green hydrogen such a valuable component in the global context. As the world really goes through a decarbonization effort, we're trying to decarbonize our economies, we're trying to decarbonize our industries. We really need to move towards a more sustainable, more transitioned, cleaner future, right? Now, a lot of these industries that we currently have, especially in the developed world, are really difficult to abate, hard to abate industries, such as steel manufacturing, for example, fertilizer manufacturing, but also transportation, shipping, aviation, for example. All these need to have some sort of feedstock that's currently really produced through fossil fuels. And that's where green hydrogen really comes in as a clean, renewable energy that is highly efficient and can really act as a fuel stock for all those industries across different sectors.
Patrick, my understanding is that green hydrogen is what you get when you have, a good base of renewable energy already. So let's talk about that, and Africa setting itself up to be able to be a big player where green hydrogen is concerned.
Yeah, look, I think the African hydrogen economy is truly well on the move. We're already seeing more and more projects being developed. We obviously had the formation of the African Green Hydrogen Alliance last year, with key members being Namibia, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, Mauritania, and Morocco. And those countries really are spearheading the green hydrogen economy in Africa and even on a global scale. We're seeing more and more projects being implemented, and these projects are not really pilot projects anymore. They're really large-scale projects. They're aimed to reproduce substantial amounts of green hydrogen and play a pivotal role in producing and distributing and exporting green hydrogen and derivative products. So that's your ammonia, for example, your green steel commodities, for example, your methanol and other feedstocks to the global market where it can really be used on a global scale. The issue is, at the moment, we're still quite early stage of the industry. It's obviously creating a lot of buzzwords. These kind of agreements that we're seeing now with BMW, Sasol, and Anglo Platinum is really, really good to see for Africa. We exactly need these kind of agreements to create local demand industries, not just export industries, because we need to be really careful that we do not form agreements for the sake of forming agreements and exporting all our commodities to the global market. We need to have some sort of industrialization, local value add to products, so that we can benefit from the economic multiplier in the long term.
Yeah. Talk to me about where we are, if we have enough resources, and that's natural and infrastructure, to develop a sustainable green hydrogen economy.
So we obviously have large quantities of high renewable potential, so we can produce large quantities of solar and wind renewable electricity, for example, at much lower cost compared to other regions like Europe, for example, which is why Europe is coming to regions like Africa or Australia or Chile, for example, to really ask for help to produce these commodities, because they have a much higher cost associated with producing these kind of technologies. So I think it's really important that we set up the right policy and regulations. We form agreements with the right industry stakeholders to get these kind of products to the markets. What makes Africa so ideal is obviously the renewable energy potential that we have to produce low-cost hydrogen. In terms of the value chain where we are at the moment, we're still very nascent stages, as I mentioned earlier. We're expecting to have the first large-scale ammonia production plants come online towards the end of this decade, and then we expect more and more to happen in the next 2040s, 2050s, where we then reach commercial scale of these commodities and these products, obviously in the markets, and then towards the 40s, 50s, we're going to have global trade, which is then obviously much more refined and much cheaper and much more efficient.
Patrick, what we do know is that the SADC region is kind of lagging behind, against its regional counterparts in terms of just economic growth. I'm wondering if SADC can use green hydrogen as a means to gain some sort of advantage. If I just think of where the hotspots are to date, is this some form of opportunity for us?
Yes, and SADC, obviously, I mean, if you talk about green hydrogen in Africa, it's obviously, Africa is a massive continent. It's not a country. I know Europe, every time you talk about Africa, it sounds like Africa is a country. It's not, as a continent. So the opportunity is obviously different. In the North Africa, you have the proximity to Europe. You can establish pipelines. You have much cheaper transportation costs. That's why we're seeing these projects in Mauritania and Morocco really taking off. Mauritania, for example, is currently really leading the race in hydrogen production. They aim to produce approximately 50% of the totally announced projects at the moment. So they have massive projects going on. But that doesn't mean that SADC doesn't have an opportunity to produce and be a key player in this value chain. And that's really where this agreement, for example, comes in. It's really good to see the international companies like BMW, the automotive industry, that's obviously the transportation sector, to come to the African shores and be like, okay, cool. We're going to start a hydrogen economy in the global world. We're going to pilot run this kind of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in Africa, see how it works. Can we implement and can we copy paste this into the global markets, and then see how it works in the large scale. So it's really good to see these kind of agreements forming with the governments and the private sector. In terms of SADC, there's obviously still opportunities to export. I mean, the Hyphen project in Namibia is really aimed at exporting green ammonia to the European markets. They've formed agreements with Germany in this case. Germany is very involved in a lot of these projects across Africa because they obviously realize they need to decarbonize the industries and they need to get sufficient access to green ammonia or green hydrogen industry components, obviously. So I think just because we are quite removed from Europe or the other developed worlds doesn't mean that we do not have a chance to play into it. And the Hyphen project, for example, produces green ammonia, I think, in the range between 2 to 3 euros per kilogram. That is already cost competitive with North Africa, for example. So the opportunities are abundant in Africa.
Well, as we're talking about bringing in economic value, what should we prioritize? You spoke about exports just now. Should we prioritize exporting our green hydrogen resources or developing them for our own use and economic diversification?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think every time I go to conferences or I have a meeting with clients, for example, I always say that we need to be careful not to become a battery for the rest of the world. We don't want to have agreements only in place that benefits mostly the developed world. We need to make sure that the local economies benefit from this more than the developed world. So obviously there needs to be a balance. We need to strike a balance. They're investing, obviously they're setting up infrastructure. We need to make sure they get their fair share of their investment, but at the same time we need to benefit. So that's why I'm saying we mustn't just export the raw green hydrogen, for example. We need to produce derivatives in Africa, may it be ammonia, may it be fertilizer, may it be green steel, may it be methanol or any other feedstocks, or in this case, even electric vehicles with fuel cell technology in it, and export these to local markets so that we in Africa really benefit from the economic multiplier. We create jobs locally, we create more income, more revenue stream, and more importantly, we reach a point of economic diversification. Africa, historically speaking, has been a very under-diversified economy, and that obviously exposes them to commodity price fluctuations if you only rely on one sector, for example. So bringing these new kind of economies, these new kind of businesses, and we're seeing more and more countries being already interested in this market. So it's not just the African Green Hydrogen Alliance that's interested in it. We're seeing Djibouti, for example, interested in it. We're seeing Angola raising interest in it. So it really helps diversifying and then mitigating the risk of commodity price fluctuation and essentially creating more stabilized and more secure countries in Africa, which then will also be less reliant on aid, for example, which obviously is a very hot topic on a global scale.
Well, Patrick, it's been a pleasure talking to you this afternoon. Thank you so much for taking us through this. That was Patrick Prestele. He's consultant at Frost & Sullivan.